Boy, what a story we're getting here in the book of Acts about Paul. This is Acts 24 today. So Paul is in with Felix, the governor of the area, and they're waiting for the Jewish leaders to come to accuse Paul of his wrongdoing, basically, so Felix can judge him. Verse 1, and after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. So Paul's been waiting 5 days, basically, under the care of Felix, the governor, to confront the Jewish leaders. Now, Hugh Nibley made a comment about this. He said, hard on his heels came the delegation from Jerusalem, the high priest and important elders, bringing a high-powered Roman lawyer with them. He reminded Felix in court that he was responsible for law and order, that Paul was stirring up the whole nation, nay, as a ringleader of a sect which was troubling the peace of the entire empire, he had crowned his criminal activity by causing a disturbance at the national shrine of the Jews. So that's basically what Paul is going to be accused of, how Ananias is going to look at this. Now, Tertullus is this Roman lawyer, basically, that they're bringing along as their counsel for them. We don't know much about who Tertullus is or anything other than this story, basically. But let's continue on here. Verse 2, and when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him. So now they're together in the courts. This is Herod's palace, remember. Felix is now judging, and Paul is there, Ananias is representative, Tertullus is there, and others. So Tertullus began to accuse Paul, saying, see that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. We accept it always, and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. So he's not accusing Paul yet. So this is Tertullus's opening statement, if you will. And he's going, Felix, we love you. You are bringing peace to our people and our area. You're doing a great job as a governor. We love you very much. Verse 4, notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. So that's like, we don't want to bother you any more than we have to today about the situation. Let me share what we know, basically. Verse 5, for we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So the Jews are claiming they have a normal, stable life, and Paul is disrupting their life and purposely causing problems for them. So they want to establish life is good, life is wonderful, we love you as governor, everything is peaceful and wonderful. And then suddenly this Paul guy comes in and disrupts the whole thing and makes this big mess of it. So you can see how they're altering how they would perceive this to favor their argument and make it obvious Paul is a problem for them. Now verse 6, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. So not only is he disrupting our peaceful life, but he is defaming our religious edifices as well. Now what's fascinating about this, the second half of verse 6 where it says, and would have judged according to our law, this whole phrase is found in late manuscripts. It's not found in the newer one. So some scribe at some point added that. So originally it would say, who also hath gone about to profane the temple whom we took. And it would stop there and it wouldn't go any further, basically. So, but there's somebody added, and would have judged according to our law. So verse 7, but the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands. So what Tertullus is saying is, Paul has made a mockery of our society. He is mocking our religion. He is disrupting us completely. Life was stasis. Life was just normal and awesome going along. And then Paul comes along and disrupts the whole thing. And we would have judged him ourselves. We would have taken care of this ourselves and not bothered you, except for the Roman military commander broke in and then actually took Paul away from us, basically. So that's what they're saying here, basically. The magistrate suddenly took him away from us and made us come to you to do this. So they're kind of throwing, they're throwing the religious, not religious, excuse me, the military leader guy under the bus. Basically, he's the cause of why we're here in front of you. We would have handled this ourselves without you having to get involved, but he brought Paul to you, and so we had to come talk to you. So trying to avoid having any stain on their hands of why they're bothering Felix, basically. So verse 8, commanding his accusers to come unto thee by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. So there's other people that are going, yep, this is right. Paul's been a disruptor and terrible and things. So verse 10, then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered. So this is Paul's rebuttal, basically, his defense to what's being accused of him. He says, for as much as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. So he's like, I'm representing myself in this case. So in his defense, Paul addressed Felix, who sat as judge unto this nation, stated that there was no disturbance at all until the people from Asia started making trouble in Jerusalem, and that the council itself had found him guiltless. Felix said he would have to wait for Lysias the tribune to come and confirm all this. So that's this next part of this story, basically. So it says, verse 11, because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues nor in the city. So this is Paul's version. He says, I went to Jerusalem and I went to worship. I went to talk to the people. I went to do these things. There was no problems. I wasn't disrupting any of the way of life. Verse 13, neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. So he's saying, look, I didn't disrupt their life at all. They are accusing me of disrupting their life, but they can't prove that. I didn't do that. Verse 14, but this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, which is, so after the way is the name of this Jewish group that broke off from the Jews that are later called Christians, the followers of Christ, that after the way which they call heresy, so I'm a member of this Christian breakoff from the Jews, and they call this heresy. So worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. So at this time, okay, a lot of this isn't, we talk about the term Christian and Jew to delineate different religions. At the time that this was happening, these were predominantly Jews worshiping God, the same Jewish God they've always worshipped, but in a different way. And so that's the challenge, is this was at the time seen more as a new version of Judaism than a separate religion. Now, the preaching of the Gentiles, that is transitioning into change that into what we would call today Christianity. But among the Jews, the worship of Christ, the way, as they were called back then, the nickname they were given, was basically just another interpretation of Judaism. So that's kind of where this is happening. They haven't fully separated from Jewish philosophy all the way, but they're transitioning that way as the Gentile nations are going to continue to cause that dispute. What is doctrine? What is tradition, basically? So verse 14 says that I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and the prophets. So meaning the scriptures. I read the Torah, I follow them, I'm worshiping, I'm doing what my fathers have always done, I'm following the Jewish tradition, I'm just doing it in a different way than we've done it in the past. Verse 15, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. So basically, I'm following what I understand to be the law of Moses just as much as they are. I interpret what is that law different today because of Christ. He changed it. But I'm still following those ideas. So I'm still following Judaism, just a different version of Judaism, basically, is what he's saying. So I haven't done anything wrong, according to even their laws. Verse 17, now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings. So remember, he's bringing money and supplies to help the people in Jerusalem who are suffering from this tremendous famine. He's bringing that with him. After gathering all this money up, he's bringing it to help him. So now he's saying, I helped. I actually brought all this supplies and money to help these people out through the famine. Verse 18, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult. So I was following the proper rites. I was doing everything the normal way. It was a bunch of Jews that came from Asia, where I had been teaching, that came in and disrupted everything, basically. Verse 19, who ought to have been here before thee and object if they had aught against me. Now notice, the Asian Jews who accused Paul initially of this problem aren't there. They're not there in this court trial. They're the originators of the accusations and made the big ruckus about what's going on. It's the Jewish leaders that are prosecuting this, accusing Paul. But the Jews who did actually start the accusations aren't present at the case. Interesting, huh? Verse 20, or else let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me while I stood before the council. Except it be for this one voice that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. So verse 21, he's saying the only thing that he has done that might be construed as a disruption was giving that speech in the Sanhedrin that caused the Sadducees and Pharisees to fight. Basically, the whole idea of the resurrection. He says, other than that, I did, he's basically saying, I admit I threw a verbal grenade into the conversation and the two groups were fighting and because of it. That's the only thing I can be guilty of. But there's no law against a verbal grenade causing a disruption like that. Verse 22. And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, understanding the teachings of Christ, this Jewish interpretation, he deferred them and said, when Lysias the chief captain shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. So he's not willing to say, but he's going to get Lysias to come and share his opinion on what's going on, basically. So it is third-person perspective of what happened, basically, but where Felix is like, I don't know how to, I don't know. I think the problem is that he probably agrees with Paul, but that would tick off the Jews, and he wants to keep the Jews happy because that keeps his nation, his governing area happy, which keeps emperor happy in Rome. So let's see, verse 23, and he commanded a centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or come unto him. So while Paul was being kept under house arrest, Felix's wife, Drusilla, who was a Christian, drew Paul and her husband into some gospel conversations in which Paul's moral fervor alarmed the governor, whose principles were not above reproach. He kept Paul for 2 years, hoping for a payoff from the Christians. So he knew about their organization from his wife, basically. So here's what's interesting so Felix is like, okay, you centurion, I want you to keep Paul under watch. Okay, give him liberty. So basically, Paul can walk around the governor's palace. He's not locked in jail. He has a room to himself. Just take care of him. Make sure he doesn't flee, or get into trouble. And that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or come unto him. So let him have family and friends come visit him. That's okay. He has to stay here, but he can walk around the grounds and do things. You keep an eye on him, basically. So the Greek word of acquaintance means family and friends. So they can come and they can minister to him. They can bring him food. They can sustain him. Back then, there wasn't a rule that the government had to feed prisoners, and so people would come and feed prisoners. So it was a responsibility of the family of the prisoner to take care of him, basically. So that's kind of the same thing. He's not a prisoner, but he can't leave because they haven't settled this matter yet. So verse 24, and after certain days, When Felix came with his wife Drusilla, so now Drusilla, she is the daughter of Herod Agrippa the First. So remember that, not necessarily Herod the Great. This is like Herod the Tetrarch, one of the sons of Herod the Great. She's the daughter of Herod the Great, which is how Felix got into this position. She was a Jewess, so she is Jewish. He sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. So Felix and Drusilla are wanting to talk with Paul more about the teachings that Paul is promoting, this other interpretation, the way, basically. Verse 25, and as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, go thy way for this time. When I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. So here's what's interesting is the gospel is, he's talking about temperance and judgment to come. You got, be nice to people, be polite to people. Christ is coming again. God is going to come and wipe out the wicked and help the righteous. And Felix didn't like that because he has massive corruption during his reign as governor in the area. He's probably executed a lot of people for terrible reasons, and he's worried. If what Paul says is true, he's not coming out on the good end of things, basically. He's got a lot to repent of. So he's like, okay, go away, go back over there. I'll call you when I need you next, basically. That takes a while. Remember, what did they say? He kept him for 2 years. So Paul was living at Herod's palace, basically, with Felix and Drusilla for 2 years. They understood a little bit of what's going on. Drusilla was a convert. She was one of the women who understood, who heard the teachings, maybe not of Paul, but possibly of Peter or James, some of the other ones that were at Jerusalem. And she knew this the way, basically. Now, verse 26, or knew of it at least. Now, verse 26, he, Felix, hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. So do you see right there? He is like, I don't know what to do about this guy. I can't really accuse him of stuff, but now apparently we don't hear about the military leader guy. He was summoned to come give his side of the speech. He probably gave the same side of speech, like, yeah, they brought him, I dealt with him, he's a Roman. So that's the part that the Jews didn't tell Felix, is that Paul is Roman. And so the military leader had to probably put that detail in, going, oh, he's Roman. I can't turn him over to the Jews then, because that doesn't make any sense to do that. But if I release him, the Jews are going to throw a fit. So let's see if we can make something of this. And again, bribery gets you everywhere in the government, apparently, according to Felix. So he holds on to Paul as a prisoner and hopes that the Christian groups will come to him and go, hey, Felix, we know you've got our buddy Paul. If we slide you some money under the table, will you let him go? And Felix will go, I gotta say this in a way that maintains my dignity and stuff, but basically, yeah, I'll do it. So he's hoping he'll get a big bribe to let him go. 2 years go by, nothing happens, basically. Felix was looking to create a situation where a bribe might be concealed among a conversation to encourage Paul's freedom. Felix's time as Roman governor, this is out of New Testament study manual, was marked by cruelty and licentiousness. Felix kept Paul in prison for 2 years, hoping to extort money from him. Despite his corrupt nature, Felix was deeply moved by Paul's testimony of Jesus Christ, but delayed hearing him further, saying that he would call for Paul later when he had a convenient season. So what Paul taught Felix really impacted Felix, probably helped him realize, oh, I've done things wrong. I've got to pay for some of this. God's going to hold me accountable for this. I don't know if I like that. So I can either accept my conscience and say, I need to repent and change, or I need to get rid of the things that are convincing me I'm wrong, like Paul. But I want to make money off of Paul, so we'll hold on to him for a little bit. So, verse 27, but after 2 years, Porcius Festus came unto Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. So, before he could collect anything, Felix was replaced by Porcius Festus. Okay, so that's the challenge here is now Felix is being replaced. Porcius Festus was a personal friend of Claudius the emperor, who was out to achieve another step in his gratis honorum by keeping Rome's most difficult province under control. For if there was one thing the emperor did not want, it was more trouble in Judea. So Felix is out, Porcius Festus is now in, and so Felix decides, oh, good, I get out of this. I'm going to leave Paul bound. I'm going to leave him in jail, basically, and to appease the Jews as this transition happens. So now, let's see the rest of the story as we get into the next chapter.